Welcome to the pre-party for Wednesday, November 13th. I realize it's been quite a while since we've had a pre-party. It gives you a nice break. You don't have to do out of class work, but now we're going to transition back in. And it's a great time to do that as we start to wrap up our meat and poultry section. We spent a lot of time figuring out what meat is, how it can be incorporated into different meat type products, talked about poultry, and today we're going to switch gears and discuss alternative choices to meat. Some of you may have firsthand experience with those alternative choices. Some of you, like me, have questions about those alternative choices. So my hope is to kind of clear those up and create a slate for you to come up with your own consumer preferences and how you view people who may or may not consume meat in their diet. When I say alternatives, we're talking about four primary alternative choices. The first and probably the most popular, not most popular, but most commonly known, just because it's been around for quite a while, is vegetarianism. Then we can think of veganism as another option. And then the ones that have kind of come to light most recently as they pertain to equivalents to meat are plant-based diets or cell culture diets. And you may be thinking, well, isn't vegetarianism the same as a plant-based diet? Yes, it is. There really are no inherent differences, but I'm going to keep it in the scope of how it relates to meat as a substance in the diet. Some notes to make before we talk about any of these are that there are really research has not proven that one is better than the other. And that doesn't mean that a meat-based diet is better nutritionally or holistically than vegetarian or vegan diets. It is really up to consumer choice and how you go about incorporating different food types into the meals you're eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Keep that in mind. My goal is not to convince you that meat is awesome because I'm a meat scientist. Really, it's to expose you to what all of these alternative choices are and how they can shape your own consumer choice. Let's start with vegetarian. By definition, a vegetarian excludes meat, poultry, and seafood in the diet. There are also what we call pescatarians, so those that avoid meat and poultry but include fish. And those are oftentimes kind of worked into the vegetarian discussion. But for us vegetarians, we're taking out meat, poultry, and seafood as a protein source. Any vegetarian can lead a very healthy lifestyle consuming a vegetarian diet. There are many different reasons as to why people elect to become vegetarian. There are some I've listed there. I'm not going to go into a lot of the reasons why these alternative diets are profound in some people's life. That we are going to save for discussion on Wednesday. So keep in mind, in the back of your mind, that options to become vegetarian or reasons to become vegan or reasons to consume cell cultured meat are multifaceted. There's not just one reason we see more vegetarians than more vegans, but less than meat eaters. So we will discuss that on Wednesday. Something to keep in mind for vegetarianism, that it's becoming more and more possible to lead a vegetarian lifestyle. And that's mainly because we have year-round availability of produce. That probably has not been a problem in your lifetime. Availability of produce has been a thing for quite a while, but if we think back to the early 1900s when food preservation strategies were not discovered or employed as readily as they are today, vegetarianism was more difficult than it is today. We also see there are increased dining options for vegetarians, specifically in the restaurant scene. So going to restaurants, it is more and more common to see a vegetarian section, or if you ask for a vegetarian menu, it is more readily available than it has been in the past. There are even restaurants out there today that are strictly vegetarian. They offer no meat options. We have one of those in Laramie, and let me tell you, it's probably one of the best places to eat. So there's just more availability of that vegetarian menu or diet available for those who may not want to cook at home and want to go out to dine. And then lastly, there is a growing culinary influence from cultures around the world who are consumers of largely plant-based diets. So a lot of cultures, whether it they choose to be more plant-based because there's just a lack of meat availability, or they're choosing to be plant-based based on cultural or religious beliefs. There's more influence of these cultures seen here in the US today and in other countries today. We're seeing a lot more variety. There might be a Mediterranean restaurant or an Indian restaurant or a Native American based restaurant that incorporates more vegetarian options than our traditional American style. If we think about numbers, vegetarianism shows up in about 6 to 8 million adults here in the US. Fairly small number, but that number is growing, again, because there are more and more options. One thing to keep in mind, though, I said that vegetarians can lead a very healthy lifestyle, and that is based on the premise that an appropriately planned vegetarian diet can be healthful and nutritionally adequate. And the key word to hone in on there is appropriately planned, okay? So if I give you the list of soda, cheese, pizza, and candy, if you were to sustain yourself off of that, technically that is vegetarian. There's no meat involved, no seafood, no poultry. But that is not a truly healthful diet, okay? So some people who choose to go vegetarian do it for health reasons. They are conscious of planning that vegetarian diet around healthful aspects. So what nutrients are they intaking? What's the calorie level of the foods that they're consuming? Some things that vegetarians have to be more mindful of than the typical meat eater is that meat is a very highly dense source of essential amino acids. Plants do provide amino acids. Not all of them are complete proteins, meaning you have to have a more diverse plant intake to get all of the essential amino acids. And so your diversity and array of plants is going to have to be larger than what you would get from meat for those essential amino acids. Also, when we talked about the definition of meat, we realized that meat is an essential source for zinc, vitamin B12, phosphorus, and iron. Those 4 nutrients are highly sought after as to why people consume meat. Meat is very rich in all 4 of those. That doesn't mean that plants are not rich in all of those. You can still get all 4 of those by eating a vegetarian diet. You just have to think that, especially on the the zinc and the iron, there are more readily available zinc and iron from meat than there are from plant sources. So knowing the availability of those nutrients and how your body will absorb those is important. One thing, and probably the most important thing on meat, the nutrient that we get from meat is vitamin B12. That is an animal-only source, so obviously a vegetarian is going to have to supplement vitamin B. And I say the word supplement because vegetarians do often find the need and choose to take a supplement, or they choose to consume fortified foods. And by fortified foods, I mean foods that have had nutrients added to them. So if we think about milk is fortified. We've added vitamins to milk to create a more healthful product for people to consume. So fortification is not bad by any means. It's just a method that certain people can get the nutrients they need if they choose not to consume meat. The last one on that list is the essential fatty acids. This is particularly if you cut seafood from the diet, because remember, seafood is going to provide the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, both essential for EHA and DPA. So we have to, again, supplement to get those. One thing to also think about is that the density of calories to nutrients, that relationship is different in meat than in plants. So if we look here, the image on the right shows how much peanut butter, black beans, quinoa, edamame have to be consumed to get the same nutrients as compared to lean beef. So we see that we only need to consume 154 calories of lean beef to get 25 grams of protein. On the flip side, we would have to get or consume 564 calories of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein. So lean beef is it's the smallest number of calories consumed to maximize our amount of protein. That doesn't mean you can't get your protein from all these sources. You can, you're just going to increase your calorie intake to do so. Also, the image on the left shows that beef's contribution to calories and nutrients of the diets for US adults. So we see that beef consumption contributes only 5% of the calories to our diets, very small percentage, but more than 5% of 8 of the essential nutrients is contributed by beef. So again, very nutrient dense option to consume that requires fewer calories to get all of those nutrients. Next, we'll transition into the vegan diet. Really, vegan diets are about the diet and what you're consuming, but there is a shift from strictly speaking of what you're consuming to what you believe morally or what your philosophy is on certain topics and what your ethics are and how they align with the diet you are consuming. Okay, so vegans, we exclude the meat, poultry, and seafood, just like in vegetarians, but we also exclude any foods derived from animals. So that includes dairy, eggs, gelatin comes from animals, honey, even honeybees are providing that honey, so pure vegans will not consume honey. There are different types of vegans though, health vegans, environmental vegans, and ethical vegans. You can be one of these or all of these if you choose to conform to the vegan diet. And again, it's really about what you believe is represented by the term vegan. Okay, so if you're a health vegan, you're converting from meat eating to veganism for reasons of health, to lose weight or improve physical health, and realize that just by going vegan will not immediately or directly cause you to lose weight. It's still a calorie intake and how you manage that with exercise. Environmental vegans are more concerned with the environmental impact of the meat industry. So again, some different reasons, ethical reasons. And then for the moral and ethical reasons, just strictly speaking about how animals might be treated or the perception of how animals are treated and minimizing the impact or the contribution. Okay, so vegans we see fewer than our vegetarians, about 1 million US adults. And what keeps people who choose to eat a vegan diet going and supported is by that social network they create. So it's a lot more to do with what you believe internally and who you surround yourself that will support you through your option to minimize any animal-derived products. And this isn't just in the diet. There are some vegans who choose not to buy leather because animals were part of the process for creating that leather. So again, goes much further beyond the diet. All right, now let's shift to plant-based diets. Again, this means vegetarian. Yes, there's really not a difference. You're consuming plant products, not meat animal products. But when we think about plant-based, we're more specifically relating the food industry's push to mimic meat products. Okay, so when we say black bean burger is a word that has been associated with beef for a very long time. Okay, so it's essentially a meat word. But by creating a black bean burger, we are creating a plant-based product. It's all plant, no animal source. But we're trying to emulate what has traditionally been known as a meat product. The prime example of that is the Beyond Beef or the Beyond Burger company, Beyond Meat company. They are one of the leaders in getting plant-based protein out on the market. If you go to Safeway, you can find Beyond Beef. You can go to King Soopers in Cheyenne. They also have it. Walmart does not have it, but their Beyond Beef is trying to get incorporated into grocery retailers. The mission, if you go to Beyond Beef's website, their mission is to create the future of protein. And they're going to do that by shifting from animal to plant-based meat. And they are doing this, creating this shift because they strongly believe in 4 global issues that are associated with animal production, and that can be minimized through the use of plant protein to provide a certain type of diet to people. Again, we will talk about these 4 reasons in class. Just kind of keep them in mind, what you feel about the Beyond Beef company saying that human health will be impacted by the shift from animal to plant protein. Okay? So you might be asking yourself, well, protein comes from animals. That is true. Protein can also come from plants, but what plants is Beyond Beef using to incorporate into their product? So they often use pea protein. That's a very common one for them. Mung bean, I'm not sure what a mung bean is. A fava bean, also not aware of what that is. So it's something we should look up together. Brown rice and sunflower protein. So a very diverse group of plants that contributes to the protein content of this burger. The next category of alternative meat choices are cell cultured, and this has become a huge buzzword in the meat industry and the food industry in general over the last 5 to 6 years. As some of you might be familiar with what cell cultured food technology actually is, but if we define it per the Code of Federal Regulations definition, that's the CFR, it is the controlled growth of animal cells from livestock, poultry, fish, or other animals, their subsequent differentiation into various cell types, and their collection and processing for food. So we're taking cells from an animal, that we are helping them to differentiate into certain types of cells, and then creating a meat product. So this is where I find fascination to arise in the food industry, mainly because there is a big debate in the meat industry, in my field, of is one better than the other? Are they the same thing? How should they be regulated? It's so new, we just don't know enough. So I'm going to kind of outline the history of it, kind of some front runners in the industry, and then how we actually make cell cultured meat. So in 1932, think all the way back to the 30s, Winston Churchill, in his Thoughts and Adventures document, said, 50 years hence, we shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken in order to eat the breast or wing, by growing these parts separately under a suitable medium. Okay, so even in the 1930s, there was discussion of taking away the variable of the animal. Okay, that is profound. Now, 50 years, Winston Churchill estimated we would be there. We did not see cell cultured meat in the 1980s. It's taken a little bit longer, but today we are getting closer. And in the 1950s was really when we started to see large-scale culture of mammalian cells. They became available due to advances in cell media, incubators, and serum. So, and that serum we mean by the things that are providing nutrients. So without all 3 of these, without understanding all 3 of these, there was no way we could just take a piece of animal, a biopsy of a muscle or something, and put it in a petri dish and it would grow. No, we need lots of things to help it grow, and there was really not an understanding of that until the 1950s. The generation of bioartificial muscles, so muscles that are grown in a lab, from satellite cells. So satellite cells are those that have not differentiated to say, oh, I'm going to be a skin cell, I'm going to be a muscle cell, I'm going to be a hair cell, I'm going to be a liver cell. We took a very long time, about 15 years, to figure out how to differentiate those cells. And that was mainly the area of focus, was just in the lab, where can we get differentiation? It was not put into the application of food. But more recently, we have thought about it in terms of food production. So in August of 2013, we saw the first cell-cultured hamburger be cooked and eaten in London. Okay, so that hamburger was created by Professor Mark Post at the University of Maastricht. He now has his own company called Moses Meats, I think. I will pull it up on Wednesday. And that hamburger cost $285,000 to produce over a 5-year period. So again, extremely inefficient in terms of providing protein to the world, but that time and that money has dramatically decreased since 2013. It's much more affordable to culture cells in the lab and create food products. One company that is situated right here in the United States is called Memphis Meats. They're located out of Berkeley, California. They have kind of kickstarted the cell cultured meat revolution in the United States, whereas Professor Post was international. And their timeline is fairly extended. They had the original idea in 2005 to create meat that was without animal origin. It took them 10 years to launch an official company, Memphis Meats, but in 2016, they produced the world's first cell-based meatball. Okay, so again, a ground product like Professor Post's burger patty, but then a year later, they were able to create cell-based poultry. Same time, though, they were being invested by investors like Bill Gates and Cargill Meat Solutions, a year later Tyson Meat Solutions. So very big companies in the meat industry, Cargill and Tyson. Traditionally they've gotten their money from animal protein. Okay, that's where they've made their money. And now they're choosing to invest in a cell-cultured protein product. You would think that contradicts, they're going to take away profits from their animal industry, but really Tyson and Cargill's mantras provide protein to the world. And cell-cultured meat is protein at some core level, so that is why we see investment of large companies. Since then, Memphis Meats has skyrocketed, created many new products, and they're working with federal regulators to try to get cell culture meat out on the market because it is not yet available for us to purchase at the store. If you're a visual learner, here's your first cell-cultured hamburger. It's being cooked. That's what you'll see on a video that I have at the end. And again, I'm not going to touch on purpose. We will talk about that on Wednesday, so quickly go over this slide. Now let's talk about the process. How do we actually make meat in a petri dish? I will tell you, I am not a biochemist. I do not know the nitty-gritty details, but as a basic level, there are 4 steps. First, we have to procure the product, meaning we have to get something to start the process. Then we have to proliferate the cells, meaning they must grow. Then those cells have to differentiate into different types of cells. And remember, meat is skeletal muscle tissue, so we want those cells to differentiate into skeletal muscle, and then we can harvest that to be used in food. Procurement requires tissue collection. That tissue comes from a live animal tissue biopsy. So the animal will remain live. We do not have to harvest it in order to get this biopsy. Once we get that tissue biopsy, we can place it in a solution to maintain physiological pH and osmotic pressure. So in a solution that essentially mimics the body or system of that animal. Then what we do is liberate the cells. This means we're going to remove any extracellular matrix with the enzymes. So when we take that biopsy, we're not just taking cells. We're taking cells plus lots of other things that help that cell survive. But we don't want all that other thing to get in the way of cell proliferation. So we have to remove it through the use of enzymes. And those enzymes are produced through DNA technology in the lab. Okay, so they're not enzymes we're pulling from the animal body. Then we take the cells, the satellite cells, or in our case, myoblasts, the muscle-specific satellite cells, and we are essentially creating a seed cell line. And this will one day, probably in the works right now as I talk, create a master cell bank, meaning we won't have to take tissue biopsies in order to grow cell culture meat. It'll be a cell bank or a donation bank that researchers could pull from and create other types of cell culture product. On proliferation, in basic terms, proliferation is multiplication of cells. We need cells to multiply, we need them to grow. But the cells require certain types of media to grow in. So they have to have something to assist them in growth. And that will be growth factors. So these are hormones or signaling molecules to say, hey, you're a cell, we need you to divide. Let's create some signal or communication to tell that cell to divide. We also need nutrients, okay? Because cells metabolize, they create energy, they use energy just like they are in my body right now as I'm talking. So we have to provide sugars, fats, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals. Then we have to do all of this in a certain gaseous environment, usually very oxygen rich because cells respire, but we do have to have some carbon dioxide because there's exchange of those two gases, okay? The current media that we're using today is, it contains fetal bovine serum. Okay, so there is a component of an animal that is being used in the media. So some people say cell-cultured meat is really not the alternative to minimizing animal welfare issues because you still have to use animal products. Yes, that is true. But there have been studies to show that if we remove that, which we can, it will cost extremely more dollars to produce that cell culture product, okay? Then if we think as those cells multiply, they need to attach to something. So they need that extracellular matrix that we initially removed in order to grow. So we're going to add some form of extracellular matrix. Think of this as like the collagen and gelatin that makes up normal muscle tissue. We just are providing it artificially, okay? Currently, all of this process, the proliferation process, is at the lab or benchtop scale. It is not large scale. In the future, to make the cell-cultured meat industry viable, we have to be able to proliferate cells on the large scale. And that's really what's holding up the research right now in preventing retail sale. Well, one of the things that's preventing retail sale of cell-cultured meat. Once we have lots and lots of cells in the culture, we have to differentiate those cells, and meaning we're manually going to place proliferated cells on scaffolding, that scaffolding being kind of like the extracellular matrix, and that allows for the continued growth, differentiation, and maturation of culture, okay? So it's just aiding the cells in continuing to grow. That scaffolding could be anything like bones or connective tissue. It must be edible, low cost, and readily available. Okay, that's where the hangup is. It's not readily available and it's not low cost. Some research are using 3D printing, cell printing, to create the scaffolding, but that's a very advanced technique, still kind of holding up the process. Okay. Again, keep in mind that these cells are still growing, so they still need media. So we always have to provide media through the differentiation process. One thing to note is that cells need exercise. Just like a fetus will move around in the womb as the fetus is developing, that movement allows for certain characteristics of cells to come about. Really what it's going to do for cell-based meat is impart texture and then change or enhance protein content of the product, okay? One thing to think about is that bioreactors or some forms of media are not yet developed that will feed the cells, exercise the cells, remove the waste, maintain the environment, and function at a large scale all at the same time. We can do some of those individually, but again, our bodies are very superpower-like and they can do those naturally. A cow's body can do that naturally. A sheep's body can do that naturally. But at the lab level, we have not found any bioreactors that can get that all done at one time. Again, another hang up for the cell cultured meat industry. Then next we get to harvest. Once the cells are harvested, meaning they're done growing and we have meat in a dish, the cells become non-viable because we no longer are supporting them by media. Okay, so it's essentially conversion of the live state of a live animal to the carcass state. So we have stopped the respiration of cells, so they're no longer growing, they're no longer active. This is when the meat can enter into the conventional food production processes. So if you would like to go on, there's a news article about the first cell cultured hamburger, a really good read to kind of give you some insight on what that event looked like. And then the YouTube link I've provided is some video footage of what the burger looked like, how they cooked the burger, some perspective on what the burger tasted like, how it felt texturally in their mouth. The last slide we're going to talk about before I let you go, and I realize we're going on 30 minutes here, is the industry has really struggled with naming cell-cultured product. The question really arises, is it meat or is it not meat? Well, if we decide it's meat, do we still call it meat or does it need its own exclusive identifier? And some of those options have been lab-grown meat, clean meat, in vitro meat, imitation meat, synthetic meat, fake meat, okay? And it's really still unclear as to what it should be called. And on Wednesday, I'm going to ask you what you think the name should be. What's the most appropriate name? For me, as a meat scientist, I've really gotten into this discussion of, is it truly meat? Well, what makes up meat? Meat is skeletal muscle tissue. Is it skeletal muscle tissue? Yes. But it is not skeletal muscle tissue that has been derived from mammalian, avian, aquatic species. Some would argue that it has if it comes from a tissue biopsy. So the naming really will dictate where the industry goes and what the next steps are for getting this product out on the market. We will see you on Wednesday.